Right, hello and welcome back to the Gumtree of Liberty. This is our first proper live stream as the Gumtree of Liberty podcast. I'm your host, LibertyDownUnder, and with me today I've got Gerry, a returning guest who's going to be coming on as a co-host now, and we've got CD McRae back from the first live stream we ever did.
Hey guys.
And
Right.
we're going to be talking today a bit about the Australian laws surrounding COVID, and whether they're legitimate or whether they're just more government overreach.
Awesome.
So I think I'll just do a brief breakdown of how the courts work for all you Americans and even a lot of Australians who don't know how it works. So very briefly, all matters of constitutional law are heard by the High Court of Australia, which is our version of the US Supreme Court. We don't have like circuit courts like you guys do. So it's all heard all together in one court, the High Court of Australia. It's the highest appeal court, plus it hears matters on the Constitution. Our laws work a bit differently to American laws. So Maryland and Madison, I think, is what it is. It applies. That's the basic rule that the Constitution is superior to all state laws, and if there's an inconsistency, the Commonwealth law is superior. That's actually was. We love that one from America, and we put it in the Constitution as Section 109.
Yeah.
109, yeah.
Yeah.
However, the other major early American case, McCulloch in Maryland, which allowed for like the Federalist Papers to be used to interpret the Constitution, doesn't apply. The High Court of Australia, as early as 1904, so 3 years after Federation, in the Emden and Petter, basically said that that did apply. Like McCulloch and Maryland is correct because all three justices who heard that case were framers of the Constitution. So they said, we know the actual intentions behind it. So, you can use external sources to interpret that, but that's since been overruled. In Amalgamated Society of Engineers and Adelaide Steamship Co. Limited, the High Court of Australia, which was then, I don't think any of the framers were then on that court, they then said that, you've got to use just the express words only. You can't go and use, like, our version of the Federalist Papers. You can't go and use the writings of the framers, or like you can't look at earlier conventions on the Constitution and apply those. It's very much a stricter approach to the Constitution than you guys have in America. That's a brief rundown of how the two are similar and how they are different, I guess. But other than that, our High Court operates quite similarly to the US Supreme Court, although we've got 7 justices, not 9. I think you guys have 9, right?
9.
Yes, we can have up to 7 can hear a case. Normally, you'll have 5 or 7 hearing a case, but apart from that, it's mostly similar to the US system. Again, you've got your judges being appointed by the Governor General. So they're appointed by the Governor General on the advice of the Prime Minister, I think. Whereas it's a lot more political in America. But of course, you get problems then, like you've got a former justice then had his daughter appointed. You've got a prime minister appointed his brother to the High Court. It's still got the same family problems as the US system does, just done in a different way. I think that's a very brief breakdown. I think you wanted to get into the Biosecurity Act, CD, to start us off.
Yes. So for people who don't know what the Biosecurity Act is, that is the piece of legislation that has allowed the federal government in Australia to implement the lockdown. It is all in an effort to mitigate COVID-19. However, it is used as a weapon against its own people. So basically, it says that you can't interstate travel, right? Interstate travel will be left up to the states as to whether or not you can go in between if you're unvaccinated. So if Victoria decides that it doesn't want people of, Melbourne, anywhere, they say no one can come in Victoria, no one can leave Victoria without vaccination, then, that's limiting interstate travel. That's deeming someone, and that's using the court case that Liberty described in the beginning to basically essentially create people who are threats to the Commonwealth. So if you don't have a vaccine, you're now a threat, and you can't, and that freedom is being withheld from you because of.
Yes, that was a statement by O'Connor, one of the three founders, or one of the three first justices on the High Court, and again another framework of the Constitution. And he basically said that Australian citizens can come and go as they please, but the exception to that is if there is if the Australian community has, in that respect, decreed to the contrary by law.
Yes.
That's the exception to that rule. Mm-hmm. That basically allows them to do whatever they want when it comes to travel.
Yes. Does it actually mention in there, Liberty, with the the mention of an emergency? Because that comes into question. How do you define an emergency? Whether there's like a plague of, and this is clearly not a plague. It doesn't, does it, mention emergency?
No, which is different from America, where the emergency, some fluffy word for emergency power to combat COVID-19, the pandemic. The Biosecurity Act lacked any language on this being an emergent care, like an emergency, and basically there will be a finite amount of this power granted until we decide it's eradicated, or it's no longer, your people who aren't vaccinated are no longer a threat. So COVID-19 is no longer a threat. But at what point is COVID-19? We're probably going to have some variation, of COVID-19. So do we have to wait on vaccines for all of those? And are you a threat to the Commonwealth because you don't get a booster? Like at what point, like we talk about all the time, at what point does this Biosecurity Act stop and pre-Biosecurity Act starts again?
Well, that seems to be up to the discretion of the National Cabinet, which has been deemed to be unconstitutional. That is another topic, but it's all tied in, and they are still operating within the National Cabinet. So it is just, there's so much grey. And at what point does because immunisation and quarantine fall squarely under the Commonwealth jurisdiction, but Liberty, I know that you know more about this from the legal point of view.
Yes.
But it is in there, though, that it is definitely quarantine and immunisation, and it's stated in the immunisation handbook as well, that falls within the Commonwealth. So the powers have been handed over to the states. Why is it quarantine? See, this is how did they get around this?
So those powers are given to the Commonwealth government under Section 51 of the Constitution, which outlines all the federal government's powers, but they can be given to the states to do instead. The basis for that is the existence of Section 52, which is the exclusive powers of the Commonwealth government. And given that if they all were exclusive, there's no point having 51 and 52 being separate pieces of separate sections. They'd just be all one section. But by having two different sections, it means that Section 51 powers can be given to the states to do if the Commonwealth lets them, and if there's no inconsistency with Commonwealth law. So basically, Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, has basically said, we're not going to pass laws on this matter. We're going to give it to the states to handle instead. Even though he can, if he wants to pass laws, we're basically, the Prime Minister is useless, and we've got 6 different premiers and 2 different chief ministers of the 2 territories running things their own way. The Prime Minister is basically useless, except to purchase vaccines.
But that begs the question of, if the National Cabinet is unconstitutional, where these decisions are being made in that Cabinet, then surely that, if it's unconstitutional, then it can't be done.
Right, and they can't be enforced. How do you enforce something that's coming from a body that is not a constitutionally elected? It's not
acceptable.
It's not. Yeah. It in the Constitution does not exist. And this particular body, is the one that is passing laws, essentially. I mean, I realize the signatures are different, but the passing of these laws is by those people. And the minister.
That's right. So wouldn't that unconstitutional decision, which is being done by a judge, then make it null and void with the Section 52, which I know you said there wouldn't be any point. It's like exclusive powers. But if it's being done within an unconstitutional body, I'm just wondering that.
So basically how the National Cabinet works, for those who don't know, is our Prime Minister, the 6 premiers and the 2 chief ministers of Northern Territory and the Australian Capital Territory basically work together with their chief health officers to pass directions about how to deal with COVID. That succeeded that replaced the old COAG system, which is the Council of Australian Governments, which met twice yearly since 1992, I think. I don't know if there was a law passed to change it legally, but it used to be COAG. But there's a lot of grey area when it comes to what exactly can the National Cabinet or do with regards to like passing legislation and laws and the like, because our executive has a lot less range of powers than they do in, say, America or most of the presidential states. We don't have executive orders and that sort of stuff. It's a lot more limited as to what the Prime Minister and his state partners, the premiers and chief ministers, can do with executive power. It's mostly done through the legislature, which is because the premier, chief ministers and prime minister, they aren't elected by the people. They're the leader of the party that has the majority in the House of Reps. So it's because our executive and our legislature are so intertwined, we don't really have the separation of powers there, and so it makes it a lot more. The powers are a lot more merged when it comes to passing laws. The Prime Minister can't really do much on his own. He needs the support of the House of Reps and I guess the Senate as well to pass laws with regards to, in this case, with regard to COVID. Of course, they have some powers. So the Biosecurity Act gives the Chief Health Officer some authority as to make directions, and we're definitely seeing a lot of that in Victoria and New South Wales right now, with a broad range of powers as to as with like human biosecurity orders, targeting individual groups of people through basically executive directions to, go after these people, let person X be able to do whatever they want or limit this person's freedoms because they're a threat, because they are anti-vaxxer, that sort of stuff. So this is going to create a lot of legal challenges in the decades to come, once we have this executive power go away, if it ever does.
Yeah, Sydney criminal lawyers wrote a really good piece about 6 weeks ago on how our government has for the past 10 years been ruling far more by decree and getting more and more that way, which would be equivalent, correct me if I'm wrong, would be equivalent to executive orders.
It's exactly the same.
Yes. So that's because, like in most other Western countries, we're seeing a real divide in the government and in the people who are voting the government in. So the Gillard government, which was the start of the 2010s, was the first government for 40, maybe even 40 years, who was in government but didn't have a majority in the lower house. And since then, it's been a knife edge. I think right now it's like one seat could tip the entire balance of power in the lower house, and the government would be out of the current Liberal national government would be out of power, and it'd be probably, who knows who would be in charge then, but they'd have to do a coalition probably with one of the minor parties to be able to form a majority government. But then, of course, because you've got a coalition, you've got to get the other party, the minor party's support to be able to pass laws. That's what we saw with the Gillard government. They had to work with the Greens to pass laws, so they had to compromise on their policies, although the parties are becoming more and more similar every day right now. But yes, that's it. So because we have had that, narrow divide, it's always been on a knife's edge in the lower house. There's been a lot more executive order, because as soon as one or two MPs decide to not vote along the party line, they've lost their majority. So you are seeing a lot more development of executive power in the last decade than we have in the few decades preceding that.
And it's interesting because I think, I forget the year, it was maybe early 2000s, so the last time we had a majority government. It's gone, in that time there were around, I believe, 15 marginal seats, and we had 151 in the lower house, to now there is over 50 marginal seats. So in that time, perhaps, in that 15 years, we've gone from 15 to 50, which is a sign of unhappiness, apathy, probably. So we're on a knife edge. This election, next election, will be, in my view, one like we've never seen before.
And that's been the go throughout the entire country. For example, in Queensland, which is where Gerry and I both are, it's used to be a Labor state, but in 2012 we saw the biggest majority we've seen in the lower house, or the only house. We only have one house of Parliament in Queensland. We saw the biggest majority we've ever seen with Campbell Newman's Liberal government, but then he turned that biggest majority we've ever seen into a one-term government and had a swing against him the next election in 2015. So we are seeing this happen everywhere in the country. We're seeing this rapid divide between the people, but then of course the government is using that divide to pass laws, while people are distracted fighting one another.
Massive division. It's all gone hand in hand for so long.
Well,
we even had protests on Friday in Melbourne by union workers who were having restrictions placed on them by the government. Union workers always vote Labor. The CFMEU, which is the main union body, will give donations to Labor for elections, and then the inner city Labor voters then turned on them on Twitter and basically got the hashtag wankers trending to criticize the union workers. Say, that's how bad the division is right here, right now. So were you going to say something, CD?
So if you have all these smaller factions, and this is coming from a person that, I've grown up with a two-party system. Obviously, I am aware that there are more than two parties, but for the most part, it's a two-party system. So I've grown up in this game, and, they can't agree on anything. And over the course of my 30 years on the earth, they have gotten further and further closer to each other while going the long way around to get there. Does that make sense? So,
yes.
And they can't agree on anything, but somehow we always have these magical bipartisan bills that are they're like you guys, with the coalition, where they came together and as a coalition, they support it with bipartisan support. So whenever you have these bills that people say are, supported bipartisanly, you've got some trouble because they don't agree on anything. So that there were some compromises made, not in the interest of an American, but in the interest of the party. So at what point does the coalition and the Liberals and all of your smaller factions come together and say, this is, do they get bipartisan? Do they ever come together and say, this is what we want? Or are the lockdowns bipartisan?
Generally, yes. So we had a swing. So we've had two state elections since lockdown started. We had Queensland last year and Western Australia this year. Both had Labor governments who, had really, really strict lockdowns. Both elections saw a swing towards the Labor governments in both states. But Mark McGowan, who's the WA Western Australia Premier, our Premier in Queensland, Palaszczuk, and then Dan Andrews in Victoria, are known as the three popular Labor leaders because they've got a lot of popular support behind them right now in what they do. So people here are definitely willing to support the government in whatever they do. For example, in this most recent lockdown we've got going on right now, the Victorian Parliament voted to shut itself down for the duration of COVID. Fiona Patten, the state senator from the Reason Party, which is left libertarian supposedly, voted with the Labor government in the upper house to have the government shut down. You had crossbenchers, which are people from in the crossbenchers. So you've got your Labor, your Liberals, and crossbenchers who are in the middle.
Mhm.
So they're all your minor parties. So most of them voted with Labor to have the shutdown. You had a couple of Liberal MPs even who voted with Labor to have the shutdown. So you generally do see bipartisan support for this stuff. We recently had a bill passed, the Identify and Disrupt bill, which we spoke about on episode 1. And that had bipartisan support. I think even the most libertarian guy we have right now, Gerry, voted for it. I can't see anything. I can't see any laws that say he doesn't vote for it. They didn't vote for it because we've got Hansard, which is records of all the voting and the debates and everything from the House, and I can't see anything that says he didn't vote for it. Usually they only record the nays. There was no nays listed for that bill whatsoever. So 150, because the speaker can't vote unless there's a tie. 150 MPs to 0 voted for that bill. I don't know the Senate numbers, but yeah, that bill, which basically gave the police access to your phone if they think you might commit a crime that is breach of a federal law, that had basically 100% support from everyone in the lower house. So there's definitely bipartisanship on the most invasive laws and policies.
Okay. Well, that's my. I mean, when we're talking about, in my opinion, what I'm talking about, because what we would do here, if an executive order or decree was passed by the president, it was ordered by the president, then a judge, a state Supreme Court judge, a judge can come and challenge that executive order, putting it kind of in limbo for, a period, 30 days, 14 days, whatever, to where it cannot be executed until it's seen by a higher court. So if you have constant bipartisan support in the legislature, obviously the judges at the high court support all of this. So then, where can you go from there? And normally, it's places like Amnesty International and the UN, right? But because of Australia's lack of COVID cases, you are now an example. You are the standard to not have COVID cases. But the way in which we got here is inhumane. So, at what point do the people who don't want this, who probably are even if they're a silent majority, are a majority, how do they appeal to people who are, that they don't want this? And especially where they live, and making sure that their representative votes the way they want.
Well, I'd say to the first part of that, we have very few places to go because the majority do support it. There are parties like One Nation, they're definitely against it, and a couple of, small minors, but probably the litmus test for that is the United Australia Party that was already in existence, but Craig Kelly, who left the Liberal Party, which is in government right now, he now is the leader of that party, and that happened, only a month ago, didn't it, Liberty? About a month ago.
That's correct.
Yeah, and since that happened, that party has had the most rapid growth ever seen, and I believe now they're over 50,000. And from my 15 years in politics, I can honestly say people don't join political parties in Australia anymore. Before COVID, they were losing, they were bleeding, hemorrhaging members. And 50,000 people in a matter of 3 weeks is unheard of. They are now on track to be the biggest political party in Australia. So that gives me hope, not that I'm saying about the party so much. The people are going, we can't do this. They're not going to help us. We'll have to join. And I know that the people that I've spoken to over the last few weeks, never been political, they've joined for that reason only. And I believe that that's going to be, I think they'll grow more. I really do. That's probably where the hope is for people. And the other one is they are contacting the various miners. But see, that's interesting too, because if I can just go back and pick up a point at what we were discussing before, Jackie Lambie, who was, what we're talking about coalitions, a month ago, she was in a Senate hearing grilling the head of the TGA, Therapeutic Goods Association, and which is equivalent to your FDA, and saying that people have a choice. There is no way she's going to tell her constituents as a senator of Tasmania that they can't have a choice. 1 week ago, the woman said she's going to, it's about time these anti-vaxxers got with the program and we're all going to come after you lock, stock and barrel. Now that she did a flip, and this is where the challenge is with these people when you're talking about how do the minor parties or do they have bipartisan support, they're flipping all over the place. It is quite remarkable.
She used to be in part of the UAP, United Australia Party, which is Clive Palmer's party, before she split from him over differences. They're both very populist, but the problem is that even, you know, as Gerry's saying, like even though the UAP is anti-lockdown, they did also propose a law in Queensland to ban having the information to 3D print firearms.
Right. That
law fortunately lapsed. The bill lapsed, but no, we don't have a party that's truly libertarian. The best we have is the Liberal Democrats or Lib Dems, but the Liberal Democrats themselves, you know, they don't have anyone right now in the upper house or lower house federally. They used to have a senator, but even that senator is pushing vaccines. They're not a vaccine mandate. He is pushing vaccines online. So people who are anti-lockdown will generally go for One Nation, the UAP or the Lib Dems, but having people split between three minor parties, you know, means you can't really have a force in the upcoming federal elections, which are March or April next year. So because we have those minor parties that people are split between, you know, libertarians will be going for Lib Dems, populists will be going for the UAP, more traditional conservatives will probably go for One Nation. That's split the right basically, and even then, like the leader of One Nation is quite controversial. She once, Pauline Hanson once wore a burqa into the Senate in protest of to say we need to ban burqas. She wore a burqa into the Senate. She's quite a controversial figure. The leader of the UAP, Clive Palmer, he's a really dodgy businessman. You know, he's been in politics for the last decade, but he's had lots of controversies around himself, especially like in business, that sort of stuff. So he's not well liked in Queensland or Western Australia. So it's very, 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 very divisive, and it's hard to get anyone, you know, to vote together against lockdown laws. And even then, like you're implying that you can vote your way to freedom, and which we've seen right now that both major parties, they are willing to vote against any sort of law that respects liberties.
Yeah, although with Clive, he is chairman, he has stepped away, and that they made that very clear. Craig Kelly, the sitting parliamentarian who took over the leadership, is being touted as the leader. So they have, I think they can see how this is going to play out. If they want to win seats, Clive has to go back out of the spotlight, just be the chairman of the party he did start. But at the moment, the way I see it is that people are looking. They'll go to whoever is going to give them their freedoms and liberties.
Yes.
And right now, I mean, personally, in my opinion, that is all we need to focus on right now, because as Liberty said, we don't have a coherent party really anymore. Labor and Liberal are two wings of the same bird, and I believe the general public know that now. That's very, very obvious. Very much like what's going on in the States, well, probably everywhere really. In the West.
Yes, there is no divide. There is no line. You know, I remember when Democrats used to question war. You know, they were the anti-Vietnam War. There were mothers that were against the war in Iraq, the invasion. You know, they were very anti all that, and now, we should stay in Afghanistan for longer to help those people, and those same people 30 years ago would have never done that. And then you have conservatives who pass trillion-dollar spending bills and say, we'll figure it out. And so,
exactly.
There is no real difference. And the only difference is, our smaller parties. And so I think that, but because no one knows, no one cares. Like you said, no one joins political parties. No one cares because there is all the same thing and your vote doesn't matter, blah, 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 blah. But I think that if the smaller parties were able to disseminate, you get the information out on a smaller scale. No, you don't get to go on some major network to promote yourself. They don't want you there. They don't want you talking. You promote things that go against their narratives. But if the people can just know that they do have choice, do you think that they would make that leap? Do you think that they would take the chance on a vote for a smaller faction?
I can't see it myself. I think they're going to flock to the UAP and the Lib Dems. They will be the two parties. The Lib Dems will get growth out of this as well, despite them not being completely libertarian anymore. The smaller parties generally too are only single issue, which is right now, come the election for us next year, people will not be just on a single issue. It's going to be all-encompassing with freedom at the top, anti-lockdown, anti-mandatory vax.
Well, that would be my only, that's what I'm working towards, so I mean, I'm only a tiny voice over here in, little bitty Louisiana. But that's where I see it too. And I think that if people are aware of the UAP, and if the UAP can present any type of opposition, whether it's small, whether, it may not be enough for us, we may say that's not enough, but any type of opposition at this point to unconstitutional lockdowns, to mandates and decrees that aren't law. It's not a law. It's a suggestion. It's a strong suggestion.
That's right. Well, I mean, I am expecting in the not too distant future of seeing massive billboards. I'm in an electorate that is the most marginal in Queensland, in our state where Liberty and I live, and we are the third most marginal in the whole country. And in the margins between those three top seats are minuscule. We're talking 50 votes. But, of course, we have all that proportional voting, which is a whole other story again.
I get it.
And so I'm sitting here just waiting to see what is going to happen. And I have no doubt that UAP are going to, the billboards will be up because they're funded. Clive's got the money. It's going to be well funded. They will be all camping out in this seat. It's going to be, from my perspective, living where I live, which might be interesting to do another one, another live or leading up to this, close to the election, because I'm on the ground here. Plus, I've campaigned here over 8 elections. I know this electorate like the back of my hand. So I'm going to be watching so closely. So, fascinating.
That is. And that's where I think that if they can market it in a way with very small bullet points, we don't need to get into like we say here in the States, don't cook the sausage, right? No one needs to know how, don't get into the weeds with it. Just say, we're for unrestricted interstate travel. We're not gonna, just basic, mask vaccination mandates, vaccination decrees are not laws.
That's what they're doing.
Just very small, you do have an option and you do have a choice. And that's where, I think this whole Biosecurity Act and deciding who is a threat to the Commonwealth and who is not based on vaccination status of something that is not detrimental for the rest of your life to most people. Obviously, some people have had terrible side effects, and some of them are lasting in their lungs and in their senses. But for the most part, people just continue on and they get over it, or they get vaccinated and they have a very small case of it, and that's fine too.
That's right.
But
it's about choice.
But what? Right. But at what point are people no longer threats to the Commonwealth? Like at what? Like, okay, so you get vaccinated, you go get it. Okay, you get the seasonal booster shot. Like but like it hasn't been proven to completely eradicate the virus.
That's right.
So at what point are you not a threat because you can't control a I mean, I've had viruses, and I've had nasty colds, and I've had terrible coughs. I'm sure everyone has, and like we still go on with our lives. You can't shut an economy down. You can't shut a business down. You can't quarantine for months on end. An economy and a country can't run like that. We all know that. So at what
point? That's right.
You'd think so.
You would think so.
But that's not. We're not seeing that. So right to get back onto the legal side a bit here, we're not seeing that right now in Australia. Mark McGowan, Premier of Western Australia, has basically said, originally the target was 80% vaccinated, and then we open up. It's now 90% vaccinated, and then we open up. So 90% of people in that state have to have 2 shots of the vaccine for that state to open up. New South Wales is 70%. And they'll only open up for the people who have the vaccine. Victoria is 80%, and it's only for those who get the vaccine can you go back to anything close to normal. In fact, Dan Andrews is saying, if you don't have the vaccine, you cannot take part in the economy right now.
Right. I read that. I saw that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is one interestingly a government senator who is speaking out, and each week he speaks out even more. So he wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, his own leader, essentially telling him he's got to stop all of this within his power to do that along those lines and take back the power that the premiers have to unlock the borders. Now, he only did that about a week ago, and I'd say I've been following him, and he's clearly throwing everything out there now. Clearly, I do know him. I don't know him that well, but I have met him a few times. He is a man of conviction. I will give him that, very much so. And he's prepared to put his own career on the line for this. So, but all they do is sideline him. I mean, he's a senator. He's not up for half Senate elections when they come next year. So he's got another 3 years to serve. But the way that he's going against his own government at the moment is very interesting.
No, that's good. That's hopeful. That's extremely hopeful, and
very, very hopeful.
But
the way,
go ahead.
The way you said 3 years to serve makes it seem like a prison sentence, even though we're the prisoners and these people in government have the power over us.
Yeah,
right.
It's crazy.
It is.
That word needs redefinition. I mean,
I think that the use of the term threat, that's like I don't know if you guys remember, it was after September 11th, and for several years the NSA and the national security team decided that we were going to have a terror threat alert. And so every day it was like a fire warning, like you would have in like the bush, right? Like today you have an extreme chance of fire. You have a low chance of fire. Okay. And it was today we have a high chance of terror. There's a high chance today that a terror threat will, come to this country. That's insane. How can you, if you know that, what are you like? Obviously, just having the TSA at the airport may do something, but it may not. So how can you create some type of measuring system for a threat that you cannot see and that you cannot. And so at what point is your threat level lowered? So you have this vaccine, so you get 2 jabs. Okay. Then you go get the booster. But then, okay, so we open Victoria up. Let's say we did it. Let's say 80% went and got the vaccine, and those people can participate in the economy. Okay. Well, what happens when the new variant, so like NU, like the new variant comes along? Do we shut down? Do we shut down again?
Well, according to the New South Wales Premier, it won't be opened at all. I mean, the last, although she's stopped all her press conferences in the last few days, but she said about a week ago, I think, that just because you're vaccinated, and if we reach that point, don't expect that we're going to get all your freedoms back. I'm not sure, Liberty, you might know this, I'm not sure whether she actually said that the borders won't open, but the intimation of that is that that the premiers are all giving out are that the borders will stay closed. This has become a political storm, witch hunt, whatever you want to use. They have so much. They've got unlimited power. Honestly, as a Roman historian, not that the Romans had a written constitution as such, but sometimes I think it wouldn't be bad to have their system, which are 3 levels of government we all inherited eventually 2,000 years on, but they also had another safety net with 2 consuls, which were like 2 leaders, one to keep a check on the other. Plus, they also had their option for having a dictatorship only lasted for 6 months, and they must step down after 6 months. We are living in a Caesarian system right now, where Julius Caesar gave himself dictatorship in perpetuity. And that's what Australia is living in right now. And it actually took quite a while to tell my son, who lives in the US, to get him to understand, because he's seeing it from your side, which I believe now he's starting to see we're in trouble here. It's serious.
I firmly believe, and this is being a little conspiratorial, I understand, but you guys, as far as the West goes, former colony, just like we are, we're not much different, and you guys are the experiment. How far
It seems that way.
Go? And my government, I feel like, is like going with us. We're a few weeks behind. We're about 5 weeks behind, but it's not. We didn't lock down. We don't have the lockdowns like you guys have, and we don't have the restricted interstate travel. We did in the beginning, but they lifted that very quickly, and it really was never enforced. I mean, there's no way. 360 million people and the whole economy, there's just no way. So it wasn't really enforced, but it was there that, you can't, like, truckers didn't get out of their trucks. Like, it was a thing. But
well, there's a difference with 25 million people. That's a difference. But can I just, there's a quote here I saved.
Please.
To give an idea of Scott Morrison's commitment to the vaccination, and even though he flip-flopped so many times, on the 2nd of July, he said this: "We made it very clear today what's on the other side. You get vaccinated and we get there, and this all changes." He said that on the 2nd of July. Now, because the Commonwealth can't vaccinate, that's why it's clear to me, and most people I know, of his commitment to get this done, because so the Commonwealth can't do it, enforce mandatory vax. So that's why he's given it off to the states to do it.
But inevitably, because of 51, Section 51, it's a farce, the state power, because even if the states don't go along with it, then it's nullified. And in America, we have the principle of nullification, and that's when a state says no. We invoke the 10th Amendment, and no, we are going to not respect this federal law. Now, we don't ever use it, but it's there. And and if someone did try to use it, I assume the forces that be would helicopter down into that state and force that state to go along with whatever it decided it needed to go along with. But my point is that we have that power. The state does have that power, and it can get caught up in the courts and at least give the state some time, buy some time. But if your state doesn't actually have any power against the federal government, then it just is the federal government.
It is, but when we've got a Prime Minister who is very clear on, even though he flip-flops and says, no, we can't, which is actually true, he can't mandate anything, but then a quote like that back July, so we're only talking 2 months or so ago, is what hope does Australia have when the Prime Minister doesn't even have any will to want to exercise the power that he has?
He doesn't want to. Yeah, it doesn't.
He doesn't want to. And that is where I just find it extraordinary.
I know. That's when you just sit back and say, oh, my God, it's amazing. It's really, really amazing that in 2021, this is after everything Australia's been through to get where it is today, that's, you're right back to, you might as well be under a benevolent monarch.
Well, we are. We're on tyranny.
Right.
Tyranny, and there's a cycle that the ancient Greeks termed anacyclosis, which is, I've always had it on my board, the blackboard in the kitchen for my kids, but because it really is true. It starts at tyranny, goes through like the quarter down to democracy or the people, whatever you want to call it. We call it democracy. Then you get apathy, which is what we've been living in for so long, for the last 50, 60 years. Apathy on the third quarter. And the next quarter is oligarchs. That's how the Greeks put it, oligarchy, which then ends up back at tyranny. And that's where Australia is right now. Now, whether we can follow that cycle again, because we're clearly living in a different times with technology, that's the question, the answer to which we don't know.
Sure. It's but I do go back to the UAP, and I do like to believe that they really can make a movement. They can make a movement out of it. And like you said, money.
They already are.
Politics. I worked in local politics myself. Money is everything. So if the Australian people who are upset at this, if they could all just give $15 a month towards the cause, that would pay for messaging to people who otherwise would not get it and who otherwise would not hear it. And I do think that, and having talked with you and Liberty and all the Aussies who are wonderful, I think that is probably your best bet. But at first, you have to decide what the goalpost has to stop at some point. Like it can't just keep going. So at what point, what will it take and I know we've talked about this before, but in Australia, what would it take? What would that moment be when they said, I don't like this. I was cool up until right now, and right now I'm not okay.
I think it's happening in Brisbane. That these crowds are mounting. I know that protests or rallies, whatever you want to call them, it's very peaceful in Queensland. I know Melbourne's having a different story, but they're saying there was something close to 60,000 people. I mean, even the Courier Mail, Liberty, which is our CD, which is our main newspaper here. Usually they don't report the truth, any of the MSM, but they even said from one end of George Street to the other end, it was packed. Now, George Street is the street where all the parliamentary offices and everything are on. So I was surprised to actually hear them say that, because the crowds were enormous. And they, whether that's a sign that Queensland is stepping up to the plate because Victoria and New South Wales are having such a hard time in their lockdowns that they can't do them, I believe people are saying enough.
That's wonderful.
This has to stop.
As a foreigner, I watch, and I see all the videos of protesters, it gets violent, and the police are brutal. It's absolutely brutal what they're doing to the people. And as an American, as we proved last year, when we see a fellow person that we feel, right, the national temperature is hot, and we all agree that something's wrong. Police harming, what we consider to be an unarmed person. People get mad. People get upset, and it doesn't matter if they have a criminal record. It doesn't matter. That's not allowed. We don't like it, and we don't want it, and we're going to take to the street and get violent ourselves. No, I don't agree with any of that, and I don't agree with the way they went about it. But the point is that we do, we say no. And now Australians are doing that, and they're taking to the streets, and they're saying, and so do those images change the hearts and minds of people who think that people who don't want to get the vaccine, maybe just yet, deserve that treatment? Is there will it take for the police to kill someone because they don't want the vaccine, or because they're not vaccinated and they just want to go into a restaurant and they're eventually killed for it? Would that be a moment? I've often
that remains to be seen. I don't know. I'm assuming you both saw the image that happened in Melbourne yesterday with that lady, the elderly lady. I looked at that myself and thought, that is it. This is the point. But Victoria has been very slow. It didn't really happen after the rubber bullets the last time. It's a difficult one. I would say it would have to be this one.
Right, I would too. That's why I saw the same images you guys saw yesterday, and it reminded me a lot of the elderly lady that was somehow got caught up in the January 6th situation.
Yeah.
Insurgency.
Yeah. Yes, for the sake of YouTube, insurgency, terrible insurgency, terrible attack on America, and that's what I likened it to. Where I said, "Oh wow, this lady's just wants to go see her grandkids in New South Wales. This lady doesn't. This lady poses no threat to anybody, and they chose her. To get. Come on. At some point, people have to say, okay, I don't like that people don't want to get vaccinated, and I think that they shouldn't be allowed to go to football games. They shouldn't be allowed to go to concerts. They shouldn't be allowed to do all that stuff, but they should not be treated violently.
No.
Yeah.
But the point is lost in so much. When I hear not the media, when I do, look at and be very careful about what I look at, it's always about anti-vaxxers. No, this is a much bigger fight. This is about giving us our freedoms, which were never yours to take in the first place.
Right.
And
yes,
that is where this is at. And for me, my children are young adults, and our daughters had a first baby. So for me, it's looking at this new generation, the little ones coming in, everyone. We're all either children, brothers, sisters, friends, whatever. We're all that. We have an obligation to stand up, and this is like a war for us. It's just very different to what all of our ancestors had to fight for.
Absolutely.
Freedom is not free. And I know that's like a cliche, but it isn't. No. And we're seeing that in Australia now, especially in Victoria. I can't complain. The Queensland police here they're very good. We just haven't got that level in this state. Victoria is a case on its own. New South Wales, clearly there's something going on there. It It is worth protecting, defending, and fighting for, because without freedom to move in your own country, there's nothing else.
No, you have no. If you can't do that, then all of it's null and void, because you can have the freedom to speak out. Okay, well, you can't do anything. You can't go anywhere. You can't appeal to the people that you're speaking for, except for your own little community. And even then, if you're outside, you have to have a mask on. So, you know, I look at it, you know, all the way down to, okay, we get to 2024. The goalpost has been moved 17 times. We've been told, the whole country's been told, you do this, you do that, you get your freedoms back, which is not, like you said, is so unconstitutional, the whole thing. So you get to 2024, and then people say, you know what? I'm out. I'm gone. And then you have an influx around the world of Australians that say, no, I'm going to go work. I'm going to go anywhere else but here. And then you're left with a crumbling economy, no workforce. And because it's not about getting vaccinated. Like you said, it's not about COVID. It's about they did this once, and they're not going to give back their power. They're not interested in giving back their power. Why?
No government who takes power ever relinquishes it.
Right.
It's never happened. Never happened in history. Never happened.
Yeah, the Patriot Act
power
was the
power is an intoxicating force.
Right. So why would anyone be so when people say, okay, you know what, I can go do whatever I'm doing somewhere else, and I don't have to worry about a QR code every time I go in somewhere, and I don't have to worry about any of this, and I can just live my life, and I'm not under surveillance, or at least not, you know, felt surveillance anyway.
It's interesting. Liberty, did you see the figures coming out of, they were published the other day, that I think 47,000 odd people have left Victoria in the last little while. I'm not sure how many months, 6 months or 12. I think it's only 6 months. And they've moved to Queensland. And so you think to yourself, well, if the Premier really wanted to keep the state, she wouldn't go down that same road, because all the people are moving here in the hope that they will have a freer life. Now, whilst we haven't got that level of tyranny at all here, we still have all of the restrictions of the QR coding, and she's trying to coerce people into having it, the vaccine. But it remains to be seen. And the other thing is, I mean, I presume it's like this in America as well, but Australia is full. All their families and friends are spread across this entire country.
Same here.
People are being denied to see their family. We all have relatives living over the border. What happens when something happens to your mother and you can't get there?
Right. Because
it's happening now.
Because you don't have a vaccine.
It's my choice. That's right. You have a choice. You don't want to have it, you can't get back. Or if you have children to care for, they're your priority, but you have a parent living over the border, you can't, then they tell you have to go in quarantine. I mean, this is not just a few people. Half the country is completely spread across this land. The lives that are being devastated, unseen. It's horrific.
It is horrific, and people can't see their grandchildren, and I mean, they're missing out on years of their lives. And it's hard for young people to, you know, have that perspective. But there will be parts of our lives where we say, well, we didn't get to do anything. We didn't go on vacation. We didn't have family Sunday. Our thing is like Christmas and Thanksgiving, right? I'm sure you guys have equivalent, something that you get around a big table and you eat a bunch of food, and and you celebrate each other. And when
Australia Day.
Yeah, Australia Day. There you go. When you don't have that, and you take that feeling of anticipation, right? Like, okay, it's Christmas time, it's Australia Day time, we're gonna get with our family, and when you lose that, you create a society of individuals with no connection, and you start to lose that connection, and then you are completely reliant on the state for entertainment, for travel, for everything, and you don't even consult. You don't, because it doesn't matter. You can't see these people anyway, and that's what it eventually comes down to, where the family unit is small, and that's all you have, and there is no, and extensions are irrelevant, and that's the part that scares me the most about Australia.
Look, I love this chat, but we've hit the 1 hour mark, and we did promise talking about the laws.
Yes.
So I think I'll go back to the point that you raised, Gerry, about the 47,000 people fleeing Victoria.
Yeah.
We do currently have the freedom of movement has been really, really, I guess, attacked by Dan Andrews. He's now said that, you can't come back into Victoria unless you have the vaccine. I think there's a border bubble 60, 70 kilometres in New South Wales where you can get an exemption, but you had 14 days, 7 or 14 days to apply for an exemption to the vaccine rule. But basically, all these people who have left Victoria to come to Queensland, now can't go back to their family without the vaccine. And I guess that goes against the fundamental belief of freedom of movement. We're seeing Queensland close their border for 14 days. The way quarantine worked here is we had what's called hotel quarantine. So the government was, having people quarantine in hotels and, holiday home sky rises and apartments and that sort of stuff. That was where they put the quarantining people. But then, that was apparently full. So they closed the border for 14 days, and then of course, a few days later, she let in the wives, girlfriends, and children of 100 football players, because all the sports being moved to Queensland. I know you're gonna love this quote, Gerry. The idea of bread and circuses. If you give the people the bread and circuses, they're gonna be happy. So Australia's got a big sporting culture, so they've moved all the sport around. Right now, most of the sports in Queensland, because we've had the least tyrannical COVID laws, so they moved all the sport up here, so that way, we can still televise it and people can still watch it. Of course, having the Olympics on and the Paralympics at the same time as the government was passing some of these, like the Define the Shop bill was passed at the same time as we had the Paralympics on, so people were distracted by the sport and didn't know about these laws being passed. So I guess that's the real problem we're seeing here is people are complacent with those laws, even though the government broke its own laws to let sporting families come up. Surprise, surprise, the government breaks laws that it passes. Who would have thought that would happen? But basically, people are happy with this. People are happy with this government hypocrisy when it comes from the left. Let's say from the right, say people will go at Berejiklian, who's the Premier of New South Wales, and she's Liberal. People have a go at Scott Morrison, who's also Liberal, the Prime Minister. But when it comes to these Labor premiers, people are supportive of the hypocrisy of these premiers in the state senators and state MPs and that sort of stuff. Palaszczuk went over to Tokyo before the Olympics to petition to get the 2032 Olympics held in Queensland, in Brisbane and the Gold Coast, and she won and came back. And as soon as she got out of hotel quarantine, they then changed the policy to it's like because of course they kept her in quarantine, but as soon as she finished, they magically opened up again. They were already opening up while she was in quarantine, and then it magically opened up when she finished, and then got out and had a big celebration of the Olympics, and had all the Olympians and choirs and stuff, all not wearing masks. It really is rules for thee, but not for me. But to get back to the freedom of movement sort of thing, I know you're talking before about the UN. And appealing to the UN and to Amnesty International for of course the problem you have there is Article 12.3 of the ICCPR, the International Covenants on the International Convention on Political Rights. I think it is something like that. Yeah. ICCPR, and Article 12.3 basically allows for restrictions to be put on the freedom of movement. Provided that it's being done in the name of provided that it's being done in the name of national security, public order, public health or morals, or the rights and freedoms of others. That's the quote from the ICCPR. However, these restrictions have to be reasonably necessary and proportionate, which we aren't seeing right now. So you could make an appeal to, like, even though it says that, you can have these restrictions to protect the safety of other people, it does say that, they must be necessary and proportionate. But the problem we have is that, unlike in America, you can't enforce international law here. I know that you guys have your Senate votes on it, 2/3 to ratify it and apply it to law. We don't have that here. The only time that international law is relevant is if there's a gap in Australian law. And then you can refer to the international law, but it's not made binding in Australia. It's all voluntary. There's no law passed about it. It can help inform debates about rights. I know we don't have a federal Bill of Rights, which surprises a lot of Americans. We do not have anything like that. We've got 5, as I said last live stream, we've only got 5 rights in the Constitution, and they aren't really political or anything like that. We do have human rights acts for Queensland and Victoria. I think there could be one for the ACT as well, but that's territory on a state. There's 2 states have the Bill of Rights, which of course do allow for some freedoms. They do list. I'll pull it up now. I've got the Queensland human rights up. I think I can share that, but it does go through the rights that you have available to you. So we do have the freedom of movement under the Human Rights Act of Queensland, but it can be limited, which is quite worrying.
Human rights
sorry,
for Victoria. For Victoria, I just find it amazing. How do they get around that, having a human rights act in what's going on in Victoria? How are they getting?
So I'll pull up the Queensland one. The Queensland one is quite similar to the Victorian one. Victoria passed theirs first. Queensland passed theirs in 2019. So that's the Section 13 is allows human rights to be limited. It must be justifiable in a free and democratic society based on human dignity, equality, and freedom. Apparently, Australia is a democratic society and it's free, and which is hard to believe right now. We're not exactly a free country. But then, so your limitations under subsection 2 are the nature of the human rights. So these are all factors that you can use to consider whether or not a limitation is justifiable. You've got the nature of the human right, the purpose of the limitation, which is subsection, which is paragraph B, the purpose of the limitation as well. Then C is the relationship between the limitation and its purpose. D is whether or not there are any other less restrictive and reasonably available alternatives that achieve the same goal without limiting freedom of movement. The purpose of limitation, and finally, paragraph F is the importance of preserving the human rights, taking into account the nature and extent of limitation on said human rights. And so that's basically how they get away with it. They can justify abridging the freedom of movement under Section 13.
But actually, D is interesting though, because proving that there are less restrictive, reasonably available. Where are all the human rights lawyers all over challenging things like this?
It's a very niche field, so we don't have many human rights lawyers.
You have one.
The thing I want to point out is did you say something, CD?
I was going to say I know of one, and his name is Tony Tarouk, and he's out of Sydney, and he has actually taken this case, like he's looking into the freedom of travel, because, like you said, it's as enumerated, it's as stated as it possibly can be. You have a freedom of travel, and he said that's instead of going after any of the other things, it's that one that he's focused on, is the right to free travel. And his point is exactly your point, Gerry, which was my point, was like what so if we're tested, less restrictive measures, there's a ton of them. Let's count the ways. And to me, that's where the case comes in, is that less restrictive measures can accomplish the same thing. Yeah. And they can.
The thing is that in Australia, the left tells us, it's, your rights stop when it comes to my safety. I hate to break it to you, but the Human Rights Act does not mention anything about your safety. That's not discussed here. That's not explicit. So in the ICCPR, it does mention the safety and rights of others. It is not mentioned as an explicit reason under 13.2. Of course, it does say may be relevant, so there can be other factors, but it is not a listed factor in the Human Rights Act, the safety of other people. Of course, you can say that falls under one of these categories, but it's not actually explicitly listed. So it's more of a legal debate there as whether or not the safety of others falls under, it is called underneath 13.2. But so yeah, unlike the ICCPR, it is a lot more of a case-by-case basis as to whether or not the safety of others is relevant. And of course, this is only a 2019 piece of legislation. So of course, being 2019 a law, well, it was made in 2018 and passed in 2019 at the start of the year. Because of that, it basically means that there's not many cases on the Human Rights Act. So we don't know what the court's going to do about it. Of course, we can. So if I'll go to the, we do also have right now, under the Constitution, we also have the freedom of movement to an extent, and that is section 119 of the Constitution. I'll just try and, it's sorry, 117 of the Constitution is the relevant one there. I'll just pull that one up as well.
Have you two, you both studied law, so have you two heard of a term called the hierarchy of rights?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's what someone explained to me once last year when I was speaking to them. So
he's probably more familiar with it. It's been a few years since I've been in school, but yeah, and I think that plays a huge part in this argument of. And it goes back to the safety versus freedom, safety of others versus individual freedom. And I like to liken the argument of, if you've ever been on an airplane, you've been asked, in the case of an emergency, to put your oxygen mask on first before you get to others. Most mothers look at that and they roll their eyes and they say, no, I'm going to put my kid's mask on first. But if a gun was pointed to their head and said, no, you have to put yours on first. You know, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so does the safety of others come before individual freedoms to make a choice? And that is, to me, right here, you know?
So I wanted to go to the argument for freedom of movement from the Constitution. It's one of the few rights we have to an extent, freedom of movement. So 117 is the right to residence in states, which basically means a resident of state A can't be subject to any laws by state B that said resident would not be subject to if they lived in state C, if that makes sense. So you can't have a law that only targets citizens of certain states, which is what we're seeing right now. So Queensland, so like, for example, Queensland's got its border closed to New South Wales, but less so to say South Australia and stuff like that. So by the fact that border is tighter, there's the argument there is whether or not that is caught by Section 117 of the Constitution. If that border is stricter there, is that unfair discrimination under that section? So if it was applied to the entirety of Australia, it'd be different. But because it's only applied to certain states, there's the argument you can make under 117 as to whether or not it's as to whether or not it's an unfair law. The idea behind that section was to mimic the 14th Amendment from the US Bill of Rights, because of course this is written close to 1.5 centuries after, or at least well over a century over since the US Constitution was put in place. It's been over a century and then some. So the idea was to mimic section the 14th Amendment in that section. The problem we have there, though, so that was the drafts of 91 and 97. They even said, to quote, "It cannot deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law," which is basically a direct quote from the US Bill of Rights, The problem then is, though, in 1898, the framers got cold feet, and they were worried, about ambiguity. So they said, well, if we make it like that ambiguous, then the courts can interpret this wrong. So we're gonna leave it out, and it would just be what it is now, which is just the idea that states cannot, be unfair to citizens of other states unless they're doing it to all states, if that makes sense. So it was meant to be a lot broader in terms of its protections, but it wasn't, because they got cold feet. And so it is only that simple sentence right there. But even under that, you could argue that if you're going to block travel from just one state, then it's breach of that section right there of the Constitution, which is, I guess, probably the biggest argument you have right now.
Yes.
I think you were looking at the law as well, CD.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking at. Is that, and then
92?
Specifically, yes. Yeah, go ahead. Specifically, just with disability or discrimination, in America, discrimination is, as far as First Amendment, or really the whole Bill of Rights, but it has to be narrowly tailored. And the scrutiny level is really high. So
yes.
like for disability or discrimination here, I don't think that the interstate travel ban is at all narrowly tailored. And it's definitely, in my opinion, extremely discriminatory. It's not based on, the discrimination is not based on something natural, right? Like, it's not based on your race. It's not based on your religion. It's not based on your sexual orientation. It's based on a mandate. It's you taking medicine that has been mandated by a group of people who do not have the constitutional authority to make that mandate, to make that decree. So
yes.
you're being discriminatory. That is discriminatory. And I mean, you could go down the wormhole of those people. They can't even do that. But I mean, it's a discrimination. And ultimately, and it's also, in my opinion, it's making your health public. You're forcing to make your health choices public, and you should have a freedom of privacy for that. And I know we were kind of talking about that before the show, but you should have a right to freedom of your health privacy. But whenever you are forced to not go somewhere and someone else is, then right? Like
yes.
Like it's implied, and it's and I think it's also meant to be a social motivator, to pressure you. Obviously, it's a herd mentality of, well, you need to be like us, and if you're not like us, then, and to me, that just goes right back to discrimination. You're either.
So can I ask something, being the non-lawyer in the group? If we had a Bill of Rights, would that section 117 have more weight?
Yes.
Because I totally agree with you. I mean, even though I haven't studied law, I've studied a lot of other things, and I can see it's very plain. That statement is so plain. And there's only been one ex-politician I actually have heard refer to this a few times, section 117, and nobody else. No one in the government or not the government would refer to it, but no lawyers, no other people who are trying to advance our rights refer to 117. Yet I look at that and see it exactly like you just explained. So I'm wondering, if we had a Bill of Rights, would that carry any more weight?
Well, if you, I mean, and Liberty, you speak to this too, Australian law better than I do, but in the States, yes. I mean, the Supreme Court takes that Bill of Rights extremely serious. There is no, like I said, it must be, there are 3 levels of scrutiny that a First Amendment, that a Bill of Rights law, anything that affects the Bill of Rights. So your right to work, your right to speech, your right to travel, your right to own a gun, your right to all that must be narrowly tailored. The law that is cannot be discriminatory, and it must be narrowly tailored. And if it's not, and if there's a formula that is created, and if it doesn't match these terms, then it is unconstitutional and it's done. There is no, no pass and go. So, yes, Gerry. I think absolutely. If this was a 1 through 10 or 1 through 107, and it said government, because the Bill of Rights ultimately does is say what the government cannot do. So in this case, it would say that the government cannot restrict. So the subject of the Queen resident, which would not be like, this is basically giving power to the state, whereas a Bill of Rights, it states what the government does not have the power to do.
Well, that's the same here. This is saying
you only have this right, or it specifically says this right will not be infringed upon.
Yeah, that's the same thing here. This says that the state can't do certain things. If we had a Bill of Rights, and if this was in the Bill of Rights, it'd be better because people would then know their rights. You'd think, but more people would know their rights than they do right now. Plus, when it comes to our constitution, it's better protected against other people trying to change it than the US one is. So we have a referendum system to change the constitution. So how that works is you must have a majority of people in a majority of states. So a majority of the Australian population, which includes both territories, must vote for the change, plus a majority of states, which doesn't include territories, must vote for the change. So you need at least 4 states and all of the Australian people to vote for it. So we've had 8 successful referendums in the last 120 years out of over 40 that have been proposed. So it's a lot harder to change it than it is in America, which if we had a Bill of Rights would make it a lot more useful than the American one is if we had it in as a Bill of Rights.
Yeah, if it's enumerated, because in our Bill of Rights, there's there's enumerated powers and there's implied powers. Implied powers,
yes,
that's where we get a little fuzzy. Like
yes,
but the enumerated powers is what the court system can and they decide on implied powers all the time, and that's another story. But the enumerated, this right will not be infringed upon. Here, there is so if you're going to interpret it, there is no room for any kind of other interpretation, in my opinion, except for it says it won't be infringed upon.
You'd think so, but hey, that's again, Amendment 2 shall not be infringed. The right to bear arms. That's been fairly infringed, I'd say, and that brings me.
And I always go back to the states have the right. I really do believe in this. I really do believe in states' rights. If Illinois wants to outlaw guns, if Chicago wants to outlaw guns, and the people of Chicago vote for that, then okay, that's their right. But no, to make it even more and more, to make it harder and harder to purchase arms through government bureaucracy, no, that's infringing upon your right. That's absolutely infringing upon your right. But it's just a good base, right? It's
yes.
and I say shall not be infringed because it's it's just like well-regulated militia. One of the laws that no one ever really talks about because it's not important, but it was obviously extremely important to the founders, was that no government can make you house military, right? So right before the revolution, the redcoats were coming and they were being forced, colonists were being forced to house these people. Yes. And now, you can't, so no. So, that's a very stated power that we have to say no. And so they can try, but they can't pass a law. And if they try, it's going to go to the Supreme Court. But it is a good basis for states' rights. I guess that's what I was getting at.
Yes.
Having a Bill of Rights is good for both state and federal law. And you have more workaround and you have more, you have more flexibility, I guess, with power in both. But the states tend to be a little bit more conservative. Or they try, for the most part, and they don't want to get involved in constitutional U.S., state Supreme Court cases. That's not, we try not to have that many cases. If they just would pass regular and abide by the rules, right? If they would abide by the rules, then we wouldn't have to have so many Supreme Court cases. But that being said, I think that it would help. I absolutely believe in a stated, and every state kind of mimics that. Your Bill of Rights kind of look the exact same. Louisiana Constitution Bill of Rights looks about the same. Nowhere else is all that different. and it's a good basis. And like you said, people know their rights. They don't know anything else.
Yes.
They don't know anything else, but they know they have a right to free speech, right? How many times have I heard that in my life? This is America, and say what I want. You know, like, and I think a lot of the West has that. You know, we have, you know, now again, the NSA tends to infringe upon that right. But you have it, and you can use it in a court case when things are kind of implied and not stated. It's when courts can say, that's when courts can get political.
Yes.
And that's when it becomes, well, what do the politicians want? And that's how I will judge this case. It doesn't become about justice or, you know, it's what does the government at large want? And that's what I'll do.
I'm more very like Senator Spooner, and I just believe I can see that having a Bill of Rights in Australia is better than what we have right now. So even though it's not that useful, it would at least allow people to know what rights they're supposed to have. I'll go to the other section where that's also relevant for freedom of movement, which is section 92.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot more controversial than 117 is because of how it's been interpreted. So there we are. On the imposition of uniform duties of customs, trade, commerce, and intercourse among the states, whether by means of internal carriage or ocean navigation, shall be absolutely free. So that word intercourse there has been taken to usually mean freedom of movement. However, the problem that we have there is it says absolutely free, and the court's gone, that's not meant to be taken literally. So the stance of our court is actually that the words absolutely free are not literal.
Right.
So that's Cole and Whitfield. That's the case on that one. It's probably one of the most defining court cases of that era. Just to give everyone a very basic rundown of how that works. So Cole and Whitfield was a 1988 case where the defendant Whitfield ran a company that was dealing with that traded in crayfish. He's Tasmanian, but he imported crayfish from South Australia. Now, under South Australian laws, those crayfish were of the correct size, but under Tasmanian laws, under the Fisheries Act 1959, which gave power to create the Sea Fisheries Regulations of 1962, they were undersized. So the plaintiff, Cole, who was a fisheries inspector under the Act, then charged Whitfield and his company for breach of the Sea Fisheries Regulation of 1962 because the crayfish were undersized under Tasmanian law. Whitfield disagreed because he said, well, they're correct under the law of where we're getting them from, South Australia. So because they're correct under that law, they should be fine under our law. It ended up getting to the High Court of Australia to hear the matter of constitution there, where the court discussed section 92, and the court found unanimously that shall be absolutely free was limited to, and I quote, discriminatory burdens of a protectionist kind. So the stance of the courts now is that section is just about you can't be protectionist.
Right.
So although it's written as absolutely free, that means don't be protectionist. That's how the courts interpreted that phrase there, and that was unanimous by the court right now. And that's been the stance since 1988 has been that stance that it's only to deal with protectionism and discriminatory measures. So, like for example, if you were going to have tariffs, for example, that's protectionist, but having different laws on the size of crayfish is not protectionist or discriminatory, so therefore it's legal. Why did the court say that it's not literally absolutely free? Well, because if it was absolutely free, there'd be market anarchy.
Right. And they don't want that. They do not want that.
And then, of course, the irony there... The irony there... Yeah. So what were you saying, Gerry?
Market anarchy. That's interesting.
So they didn't say market anarchy. The quote was anarchy, but they were talking about in the markets.
Yeah.
So that means an absolutely free economy. So what the court's saying here is that we can't pass laws that are protectionist. However, we cannot be not protectionist.
Right.
We cannot have market anarchy, but you can't pass laws that are protectionist. Even they're saying that there cannot be anarchy is protectionist in and of itself. So it's very interesting as to how that works. Of we could pick that apart for a while and see exactly what that means by absolutely free, and which should be taken, in my opinion, should be taken literally. Like, although I'm no lawyer, I'm just a law student. Basically, like, in my opinion of this is that should be literal, because it says absolutely free, and generally when the courts construct. Well, so when something is ambiguous, the policy in Australia is that you construct it or interpret it in a way that gives meaning, that gives effect to its express literal meaning, unless that is unreasonable, in which case you give it a different meaning. So obviously the court here has gone, we don't like the literal meaning, we think it's wrong, so we're going to say it's actually a different meaning than what it literally means. So I am not a fan of that, if I'm honest, but because of that, you cannot argue freedom of intercourse under Section 92 right now. You cannot argue that you have the freedom of movement, because the court can abridge that right.
Right.
There's a very early case on that section. I don't remember its name. I think it was Rees-Smith, and that said that. That was one of the cases that was an early case, which said that Section 92. I think it was Rees-Smith. I can try and find that now, but it was really interesting to see the court's been commenting on that for a fair while now as to what exactly that means. I'll try and find that one now. If you've got anything else you want to add there on that section, I'll try and find that.
So does that mean then that does not bode well for us as in Australia? Should any of the lawyers take this to the High Court, that clause or section there could just blow it all apart?
Correct. You'd be better off arguing under 117 than 92 because of what the court has said about that section.
But would 92 override anything because it's of the ambiguity there, would it, or not?
I don't know. I can see where you're coming from there, because I guess the problem would be the court's going to work out the court has to work out how to reconcile 117 with 92, and I don't know enough about the law to try and argue that case. But yeah, it definitely is an interesting point you raised there as to what happens when you have two different arguments under those two sections.
And I guess we'll see, because we've got a few cases from G&B lawyers, AFL lawyers are already submitting cases against the New South Wales government.
I know Clive Palmer's taken WA to court for their border laws.
Yeah.
I found it. So it's the Crown against Smithers ex parte Benson, which is a 1912 or 1913 case that was heard by the High Court. That was the Griffith High Court. At that point in time there were 5 judges. 3 of them, O'Connor, Barton, and Griffith, helped to write the Constitution. 2 of them, Isaacs and someone else, did not help write. Were not as involved in that. So a lot of these early cases that are more supportive to libertarian ideals were heard by the original 3 judges, which were O'Connor, Barton, and Griffith. Griffith was the former Chief Justice of the Queensland Supreme Court. Barton was the first Prime Minister, and O'Connor is just there in the background. He's the third least important member of the trio there. It's like the 3 guys who went to the moon, and no one knows the name of the guy who stayed behind. That's basically who O'Connor is. Like, he's the least important of all 3 of them, because you've got the first Chief Justice, which was Griffith, and you've got the first Prime Minister, which is Barton. So obviously they're going to be more dominant in early High Court judgments, because they're that much more important. The High Court was only established under the 1903 Judiciary Acts, and that basically said that you had three judges on the bench. That was then made 5, and then eventually 7. But the original 3, so Barton, who was at that time Prime Minister, then resigned from being Prime Minister to go and be a judge, and he was fighting with the guy who became second Prime Minister. They both wanted to be a judge, and in the end, Barton won, and the other guy became Prime Minister. So. As I said before, it's very much about politics in our court, even though it's done it in a different way.
Would you have to overturn if we were to use 92? If a lawyer, brilliant mind, could come up with something with 92, would he have to first get that court case overturned to proceed, or can he brief its illegitimacy with the case that he's bringing today?
So with regard to that, the Crown against Smithers, ex parte Benson, Isaacs and Higgins, which were the 2 later judges, so they were judges 4 and 5. Their argument in that case was based on Section 92, and they said that it is actually absolutely free. Whereas Barton and Griffith said that they argued on the basis of federation in that case, so that wasn't as relevant to what it is right now. So that they looked at a different issue, but Isaacs and Higgins, who agreed with them in the verdict, approached it from Section 92. So you could take that argument. So how precedent works in Australia is that the High Court here is a lot more willing to overturn its earlier judgments than the American High Court is, the American Supreme Court is, sorry. So the High Court, as you've seen here, they overturned Smithers with Colin Whitfield.
Right.
Whereas the US Supreme Court is a lot less likely to overturn, say, Roe v. Wade. So the precedent here is, although it holds weight, precedent in Australia is more likely to be overturned. So you could argue against Colin Whitfield. You'd have to rely heavily on a case like Smithers. So it is arguable. It just depends on how much weight the court gives to different things. So because this is the current approach, Colin Whitfield has the most weight. So you'd be more on a case-by-case basis to try and dislodge Section 92's interpretation under Colin Whitfield. You'd have to look like you have to dislodge small parts of it step by step until you can get to a point where you can overturn the entire Colin Whitfield case. So you could argue it, but it would be difficult to argue 92. Your better bet would be under, which is like Gerry said, your best bet would be arguing under Section 117 and then basing off of that, and also Smithers, and taking those 2 combined and arguing against 92. That's the best way that I'm doing. Again, I'm no lawyer, so I don't know the intricacies of that, but that would be probably how I'd see the best way of going against that section is Smithers and 117.
And the dissent. Can you use the dissent of the dissenting judge's argument in your discovery? And
in Colin Whitfield?
Yeah.
That was unanimous. So all 7 judges went the same way on that case.
Okay.
I think the judgment was all 7 had the same judgment. I'm pretty sure all 7 were writing the same judgment. So what you get sometimes is you get a majority, which is all judges, or you get a plurality, which is they all agree, but they use different arguments. So in Smithers, you had a plurality, however you pronounce the word. Whatever. You had 2 and 2. I don't know which way O'Connor went, but Isaac and Higgins was one argument, and then Barton and Griffith was a second argument. So you've got there basically you can argue off of either of those, but they hold less weight because of the fact that it's not an absolute majority. So it would be a lot harder to argue off of that than it would be. So if O'Connor's, for example, voted with Isaac, decided the same way as Isaac and Higgins, it would have more weight. So the way things work in Australia is that dissenting judgments have the least weight. Then it's a plurality. There we go. That has the second least weight because it's not all judges making the same judgment. And then if you have that, and you've got, say, because there's 7 judges right now. If you've got 2 and 2, or if you've got 3 and 1, which makes it a 4, but if you had 3 decide one way and 1 went in a separate way, 3 would have more weight than the 1 would, because there's more judges. And then going forward, you'd have, if it was a 4 and 3, that has more weight, and then 5 and 2 has more weight, 6 and 1 has more weight, and then a unanimous decision has the most weight because it's got the most judges that agree with the same judgment. So in that sense, Cole and Whitfield is quite influential. It is going to be hard to overturn. It could be done possibly, but it is quite hard to overturn that right now.
Yeah. That would be, you have a high court that's completely supportive of all of this. So, it would be really hard. The case, they don't want to vote that way. They can say they're, impartial and, all that jazz. We know better. And that would be, yeah, it would be hard. You'd have to come at the case from their side. And there is no legitimacy. Yes. There is no legitimacy. So, but they don't want to hear that. The courts don't want to. I'd be surprised. I'd be shocked if they even decided to hear it. They just push that can down the road, until 2024, when it doesn't matter anymore. And so that, yeah, okay. Well, I think 117 is definitely. I see a case there all day long. Again, I think that the language of using disease versus virus can also go into that, because you're talking about discrimination, and you're discriminating based on a vaccination status. And again, I understand the economy and letting people go to things like, fun things.
Yeah.
I okay, that's that venue, as far as a libertarian, if the Coliseum or whatever doesn't want us to attend without a vaccination, okay, then I guess we don't go to concerts there. But it's discriminate, but the law, the decree, it is not even a law. The decree is discriminatory based on the right to travel. It's you are allowed to travel, and there are plenty of measures that can be taken that do not have to be as restrictive to make sure that the spread of COVID-19 is minimal, if not zero. But preventing people from traveling is I don't see that as helping anything. I guess you could understand maybe other countries. I guess maybe if you as a country decided you don't want to allow people in, I guess that's up to you. But as far as interstate, you should be allowed to go, and you should be allowed to go to other people's houses. If you can't go to restaurants, you can't go to pubs, you can't go to football games. You should at least be able to go to someone else's house who's inviting you there. The government doesn't have the right to tell you can't go there because they live in a different state.
But even what you're saying about international borders, you've got, as I said before, you've got Potter and Minahan, which basically says that even internationally, the government is perfectly allowed to stop you from coming and going, even if you're a citizen of the country, let alone anyone else. So
which they're doing.
Yes. Even if we were allowed out, we would, even if the government allowed us to get out, they could probably get away with, you can't leave without a vaccine, for example.
Right. So then it's East and West Germany, and you were on the wrong side today. Well, welcome home. You're not allowed to go. You can't cross. You can't. No. And then and then what are you supposed to do? And so it's coercion. Then it becomes coercion. And
it's full on coercion. And where do the quarantine camps fit into all of this? Because I'm listening intently, Because if we can't cross the borders, they say we can't do that, that they're building these quarantine camps, facilities, they're calling them, which will take 12 months to build. There's 2 here we know about in Queensland. I think there's one in Victoria and New South Wales. Well, then how does that marry up to the whole crossing borders? None of this makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. If we can't travel, then why have those camps in the first place? I guess when they open up to start with, they might let people come into Australia with a vaccine. But I know Palaszczuk had the vaccine. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Gerry, but I think Palaszczuk had the vaccine to go to Tokyo, correct?
Well, they made it look like that.
And even then, she had to quarantine. She had to go into quarantine when she got home for 14 days. So that's like you need the vaccine and quarantine and masks.
That's it.
So what's the vaccine for then?
But this is the question we're asking everyone, people we know in Sydney who have been double jabbed but still not allowed to go out. And when we pose the question, they can't give us an answer.
Yeah, yes, agreed.
None of it makes any sense.
I would love to think that just going and getting a small vaccine twice would then allow me all the freedom. But I cannot abide by that thought. It's not ever going. The only way to fix it is to not comply. And that is detrimental to most people. But it's not going to stop there. It's just not going to stop. And so, okay, you may be able next year to get on a plane. Let's say, for your guys and you guys' cases, this is 2024. Okay, but then what happens whenever the next thing happens? And then they're
already talking about the next one.
Right, you go.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's until they can figure out what works. And that's my thing. Figure out what works. I would love to have people not be sick. I would love for people to not be sick. So you guys figure out what it's going to take for them to not be sick and then get back to us. Because clearly none of the suggestions that you have made up until this point are working well enough to where we get our freedoms back. And so if the masks and the jabs and the travel restrictions and the quarantining and the 6 feet apart and the virtual work, no one's allowed to go to work. No one can go to a workplace. None of that's working.
It isn't. And the Queensland Chief Health Officer told us a week or 2 ago that masks would probably be here for years. See, this is all very new to humanity. If they know now that viruses have life courses.
Right.
They have life cycles. But this one, they clearly know so much about it that it's just going to be continuing. To the whole thing, having pandemics will become endemic. That's what I'm hearing and reading now. That is what's happening. Pandemics are going to become endemic. Something was put out yesterday from the WHO, or I forget where, that we're going to have, this will be forever. That's interesting. How do they know this?
Right.
Right. Of course, none of that makes any sense to people like us talking about this. It's everyone else. We just need to say, wake up. None of this is normal. None of this is right.
And it's not going to get better. Your compliance
clearly
will not award you. You will not be rewarded for compliance.
That is starting to happen. The other thing is, they get around it by saying it doesn't protect you from getting it or transmitting it. It just gives you less chance of dying. Okay, so if everyone's vaccinated, that's the reason we're given, then why all these other things? Why all of this? And then you could flip it on the other side and say, okay, you want to save every life, you want to stop every single person from dying on your watch, but you just passed a euthanasia bill.
Right.
I mean,
And
you just passed a euthanasia bill, and we're happy to do it.
It's all politics. That's all this is. It's a game of politics. Like, because we've got the election coming up in. We've got the election coming up in 6 months. We've got a few marginal seats in Queensland federally. Again, as I said before, all you need is a couple of seats to go Labor, and they've got the government. The way I see it is that they're building 2 camps in Queensland. One of them at Wellcamp Airport, which is 20 minutes away from where I am in Toowoomba, and then Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, did not like that idea, so he didn't endorse it. He said we don't need those camps. And the next day, they announced they're going to build a federal government camp in Brisbane on an old army base. I think it's an old army base, on military land
near the airport.
So the way I see it is basically like they announced the camp for Wellcamp, which is supposedly because it's good because it's a non-metro area. Is what Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister, who was his Labor, said. And I'm like, excuse me, what? It's not metro. We're the second biggest inland city in Australia. You're calling us rural, or at least not metro. But we've got 2 private hospitals and 1 public hospital. That public hospital is at maximum capacity. It's full. If we have any more COVID, like if COVID cases break out from that facility, which they always do in Australia, there's always a breakout from hotel quarantine or anything like that.
Yeah.
There's always been breakouts from those facilities. If that happens to us, we're screwed in Toowoomba. And the idea, that we're going to build this, where it's more regional, where it's away from Brisbane, like where I am is a conservative stronghold, LNP stronghold, federally and at a state level. We're so conservative that in 2017 we had a same-sex marriage plebiscite, which was basically a postal survey because the government had no guts to decide on same-sex marriage. So they said, we're going to do a postal survey to get the people to vote, voluntarily, of course, which we've had mandatory voting for a century, and this one time they wanted voluntary voting, which is weird. But they said, we want the people to vote, and then we'll base our vote on what they say. Where I am, which is the federal electorate, is Groom, we were one of the few electorates to vote against same-sex marriage. 50.8% to 49.2%, I'm pretty sure the figures were. So it was only a slight majority against. It was only a slight majority, but even then, like the fact that was the case compared to everywhere else, we're basically the middle. We are basically the middle of Australia's version of the Bible Belt. We have the most churches per capita in the state, possibly the country, but definitely in the state. So we're very conservative. So the Labor government did not consult the council, the Toowoomba Regional Council did not consult, which is our local government. They did not consult any of the 3 relevant state MPs, all of whom are Liberal. They did not consult the federal MP, also Liberal. So they didn't ask anyone who's actually here, do you want this camp here? They just announced it. The way our council found out was from the news. So that the state government, when it put this here, didn't tell anyone they're doing it. It was discussed. It was on the table since January, but the people here had no idea what was going ahead. So everyone that I've spoken to, and my dad's spoken to a few people, and like everyone here is like, "What the heck? Like, we don't support this. What are you doing with this?" So no one supports it. It's all politics. Like the way I've been saying to people that I talk to, like the idea here is that they're putting the camp here so they make us comply. So we have not had cases since May or June of last year. So no one, like the policy in Australia right now is you've got to do mandatory QR code scanning wherever you go somewhere, so the government can track you for contact tracing. We have very low compliance rates for that compared to everywhere else because again, no COVID since last year, like middle of last year. So by putting the camp here, it forces compliance from us, and it can also be used to win votes from the marginal seats on the coast, and then flip Queensland to vote Labor, because how the gerrymandering works is that it's usually Labor at a state level and Liberal at a federal level. If they can flip those marginal seats to go Labor, they can oust the Morrison government and put a Labor government in place instead. So it's all politics. Like they're putting the camp here to win votes from the coast, basically, because they know they can't flip us. Like the elections at the state level is always like 60-40 at best for Labor. Usually it's more than that for Liberal, like mid-60s. Usually, they know they can't flip us. So, but they can flip the coast by screwing us over. It's all politics. I'm telling you that's all this. That's all we're seeing right now. And of course you've got all of Labor backs this, even though they're happy to screw us over. The small folk. Well, they get, and of course it's being built on Wagner land. Wagner is a big family. They already own the airport, so they're getting money from that, and then they're going to own this camp as well. You've got a private family owning a quarantine camp on their land. And then now the government's saying, like the federal government said that their camp in Brisbane is going to be used for natural disasters as well. Interestingly, so they've told us that these camps are going to be around for a long time to come. We're going to sit. It's going to be life with these camps it's basically for as long as we need them. Like they've admitted that these camps are not just for COVID.
Australia 2021 penal colony redux. Honestly, it is it is a shocking situation.
When we talk, I know when we get into it, I always try really hard to be optimistic, and then we just goes up camp.
I'm still optimistic. Yeah, I'm still optimistic. It's just the reality.
It's the reality. It can change every day. It can change.
Exactly. We can find. I just never thought this would happen.
See, I'm a lot more black-pilled. I'm not surprised. I'd say I'm probably more like a dark grey. I'm not surprised by this at all. Like considering, like even though like I was born after the gun ban, like I could see this was coming a mile away. Like because Gerry said that she's been a lot more optimistic. Like you've been involved in the Liberal Party for a long time. I have seen this coming like from 2019, 2018. Like I've seen like probably 2019. I've seen that this was coming. Like as soon as they started with lockdowns, I'm like, we're not getting over this. Like this is here to stay.
I saw it. Yeah, I saw it straight away. I was actually in the middle of running a campaign in March. We had council elections here, CD last March when it all broke out. Just for transparency, I'm not in the Liberal Party anymore. I left very early this year. But last year I was running a council campaign in my area. So I saw it up front, right up close and personal, and I knew something wasn't right. We were losing volunteers just like all of a sudden they went dropped off. Oh, we're so scared. There was just something not right about it.
Right.
And I knew then, and I started doing a little bit more digging after and then we were locked out of our, we weren't allowed to scrutineer, which is vote count. They locked us out, the volunteers of the vote counting. It was already in the courts, I think, that day, even still deciding at the lunchtime whether they'd be letting us in, because our council elections are very political here. Which was never the way back decades and decades ago at council level. So it was the most interesting thing to be in the middle of when that happened. And they took us off, you remember, Liberty, we weren't allowed to even volunteers at the voting booths.
Yeah.
The pre-poll, which was running 2 weeks prior to that, they took us off that. We could only leave, this is for all parties, which were mainly three, the Greens, Labor, Liberal. And we were allowed to, in the morning, they had to put the A-frames, the signage out and leave. It was the most bizarre thing. I saw it then and I thought something's really not right here. Plus the fact we had to cancel our trip to our first trip to America. We had booked and paid for.
I have a friend of mine whose parents were on their way. They were in the middle of their flight for a 2.5 week trip to New Zealand, and it had been like a bucket list of theirs. It's my parents of my friend older, been in business a long time, worked all their life to be able to, you know, go do this trip. And I think they were in, I don't know where they were. They were in some airport, in the middle of nowhere, you know, way away from America. And we're told, turn around. You can't come back. You can't come in here. And so, yeah, I mean, yes, people's lives, and that matters. And like I said, those things matter in a society. They matter in a Western society. We look forward to that. We have vacations. We have holidays. This is part of who we are. And
they matter. That's exactly right. You've said it right. Our lives matter. Those things matter. Our son, we haven't seen him for 3 years. And I'm not making it about me. This is a universal, because it's absolutely universal. Yeah, but I can speak directly of it for what we're discussing and the impact it has. And we thought, well, he'll be over there, he may not come back. So we always thought we'd see him once a year, we'd go over there, or he could come back. Mm-hmm. And the impact it's having on, I know it's a bit off topic, but maybe we could do this on another thing too, on all of the, I'm seeing it on my son, and it will be magnified millions of times, really, because that's how many people live overseas, out of their own country, wherever that is. The impact is really taking a toll, because they can't come home when it concerns Australia, because they want to stay there for work, so they can't come back. And that's an international border thing. So now it's been 3 years since we've seen him. We won't get the jab, and he can't risk coming back, or his friends, because they can't get back to America to continue there. They've built their lives there. He's got a great career there. Right. So the impact is horrendous on lives that are unseen. So these lockdowns, borders, but particularly for Australia, because I know he's travelling within America. They're always going away. You guys can do that internally.
Yes.
But we can't.
Right. And that's why
wrong.
Interstate travel is what is, like I told Liberty, I said, if you, because at least here, you know, I can drive to Florida, no problem. I can drive to Florida if I want to go to the beach. I can go to Alabama, go to the beach. Like, it's, you know, and I don't have a QR code. I don't have any of that. And to me, that is what the case for these lockdowns boils down to. It's not, we can't make a case against the fact that these people that create these decrees that aren't laws are unconstitutional. I mean, it's so ingrained right now. I mean, that would take generations to break that up, you know. But you can absolutely make a case that threats to the Commonwealth is an extremely arbitrary term, determining what that threat level is and how much it can affect a group of people. I mean, you know, and, you know, I think 117 is just, you know, I think it's important. And to me, if we could appeal to attorneys in Australia to just make the case, to have politicians to have the UAP. What I was going to say was ask the UAP, do they have some strong candidates? Like, have they just, like, I don't really know.
They haven't seen it yet. They haven't got them yet.
Okay, so you're 6 months out from an election and you haven't seen the UAP.
Look, this is Americans are surprised by this. A long election cycle here is 6 weeks.
What? So
so Australians will call a long election cycle a 6-week campaign.
What?
Because we don't, people don't tune in till that last couple of months. But interestingly, yesterday when we went into town, just driving out of our area, our federal area that I'm in is a Labor Party, which is equivalent to your Democrats. Our Labor Party candidate was already out, which is very unusual. Liberty, I've never seen it this far out from a federal election where they start campaigning. Now, I believe that is probably the threat from UAP, because Clive Palmer is being the richest man in the country. I don't know whether there's even other people helping throw money behind this whole thing. When he starts, I have no doubt it'll just be massive. But I've never seen that before, ever, 6 months out from a federal election where they are campaigning. I've never seen it.
So to me, that's like, Miss Gerry, that's the best thing that any of them can do. If they're considering at all, if they're considering working for them, the best thing they can do is get on. And really, it just needs to be like this. I mean, it's a Facebook Live, and it's saying, I'm calling these people out because they're wrong. And yes, at the threat of the state getting mad at me for saying what I'm saying, sure. But, that to me is when you garner, the younger people who aren't bought into this, the people, just anyone that isn't bought into this, just hammer it down. I mean, I'm not a big fan, but if Donald Trump taught us anything, you just say it, and people respond to it. You don't sugarcoat it. This is wrong. I
believe we're at this point. I personally believe this is the point we are now at, and I don't think they're going to hold back. Clive Palmer did a press conference 4 days ago. Did you see that, Liberty?
Yes, I saw part of it. Yes,
he calls it. That's him. He's not running. He's not the leader. But I imagine that is how they're going to play this. They're going to call it out. But they're so young that they will still be vetting candidates,
right?
Because
right.
Yeah, it's early days for them.
If they
I spoke to one Aussie, and he said that I'm not going to name names, but his federal electorate, the member there. Again, 6 months out from an election, the member there went out in public and said, if you've got any questions, I'll have a session this time. If you've got any questions, you can come and ask me those questions. This guy I spoke to was the only person who turned up. He's a relatively young guy. He's the only guy who turned up to speak to his federal MP, member of Parliament. It was just him. It was admittedly it was a bit miserable. The weather was a bit miserable, but he was basically it was just me there, and the MP was a bit hopeless. He asked about voting records, that sort of stuff, and the MP just couldn't give him the answers to important to what you'd think are basic questions.
No, he doesn't know. He doesn't know because
they
don't tell him.
That's it. We do not have the best representation in our Parliament anymore. We just don't, and apathy has led us to this. When you don't
have to fight for anything, and you go for generations with no war, which I don't believe in war, but there's no physical fight. There's no physical fight for something. And the government just keeps taking power away from people, but making it sound like that's a solution to their life versus a problem. Yeah, but they're because people don't want to make choices. People do not want to choose for themselves. People don't like to choose where they go eat at night. And to get involved in anything, I mean, they stub their toe and it's like, no, I'm not going. But it will take a group of, I think that people are into quick, for lack of a better term, just, quick, sexy, in your face, kind of like Liberty and I on Twitter, just in your face and telling you why you're wrong in 140 characters or 280 or whatever it is now, and I think that those hot takes can make traction. And if they're I think that if it's, you find one person and they're and they don't even know this exists. They don't know we exist. They don't know that they have a group. They're not alone. They're not alone in their feelings, and they're not alone in their positions. I think that's where the numbers with the rallies are showing other people as they're increasing, particularly in Brisbane, in Queensland, because we are reasonably untouched by certainly any that's going on down south. So we're untouched by that, and yet we're having growing numbers, huge numbers. That is a sign that people are saying, well,
we're not alone, if they can do it, or aunt such and such, or uncle. I mean, the people that go, an absolute cross-section of our community, absolute cross-section, young, middle, elderly, out there, conservative.
Right. Pink haired, old blue hairs, everything in between. You know, and it's because it's not about how you feel about, I don't know, in the case of America, it's not about how you feel about abortion, gun right. Like we're here because we need to be able to freely travel. Like we'll deal with that other stuff. We'll deal with that other stuff later. Right now, the main thing is this. And people don't like a lot of information, so don't give them a whole lot of information. People don't like to read. People barely have a attention span for an hour-long Netflix show, much less anything that's like political or not entertaining.
This you mean like this 2-hour podcast?
I know. Because we love this and we want to help. And I would love to take this and then just share it and say, look, you're not alone. There's people in America that follow it with their heart. Like I every day I have Australian news on my Twitter. Like it is the first thing I see is, you know, what's going on. I've learned Australian geography for this because now I have to know where Brisbane is, and I don't know. 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney is the only place I knew in Australia. Really, and now, but they're not alone, and I think that's like I said, that social pressure can really get to people. You know, we're kind of free thinkers, and so we don't really care, but a lot of people do, and they want to be an outsider. They don't want to be, you know, not part of the status quo. And so, but they don't agree. Yeah. They don't agree.
That's why we've set up this Aussie Liberty Network, just to reach out to those people and say, like, we're here. Like, we've got 2, maybe 3 podcasts. You know, we've got a website going up at some point. That's the idea here. Is, you know, to reach out to people and say, you know, you aren't alone. There are people here who've been going through this with you. Like, I remember months ago, I was talking to a few Aussies online, and like Aussie libertarians often don't meet other people who are libertarian in person. So I was bringing people together and said, like, you aren't alone. There are people here who believe the same things as you do, who share your beliefs. This is because we're such a minority here, but people who are liberty minded are more common. Like, you've got again, you've got the Lib Dems who are quite prominent in Victoria. They've got 2 state senators there, even though it's such a bad state with Dan Andrews. So people, you know, are realizing that there are alternatives out there. It's just a matter of, you know, getting people to mobilize and work together. I guess that's the big problem we're seeing right now, especially during COVID.
I think it is really, it's terrific what you've done, and it will grow because we're attracting different networks, demographics. Now I've got a whole different one again, and so I'm going to have a reach and share all of this. I've already spoken to so many people that want to know about this, and we've said we've connected with, they know about Liberty, but it's to connect with you, CD, and all of your network. This can only help. I think it's really important that more Americans or anyone overseas really, really does know. I'm talking about it.
I'm constantly. You got like whatever's happening here. Have you guys heard about Australia? You know, like, do you guys know what's going on? And you know, it's terrible. It's horrifying. And if we inch anywhere near that, people need to just get mad. And but I think that the growing numbers in the UAP, the growing numbers in the street, because people don't want to be the first people in the street. No one wants to be the first guy. No one wants to be the first line. No one wants to be the guy beaten in the video. Nobody wants to be that guy. But if 100 people are there, okay, I'll go. You know, okay, I'll go walk. Maybe they walk on the very outsides to not appear completely with the group, but in a picture they add to it, and then it becomes more inviting to other people, and you know, it's the energy we'll get, and especially because y'all's summer is like soon, right?
Coming up. Yeah, we're on our way.
Pictures of the Sydney beach where people went. I think more people need to go. People just need, and I know Sydney isn't you guys, and it's not down south, but you know what I mean? Like, people need to keep, no, we're just going to live our lives. And you're just going to have to arrest all of us if you want us to leave.
Yeah.
And,
we have passed the 2 hour mark.
Yes.
I've got one question from the chat, and then I think we'll finish up. We've already plugged the network. I'll just pull up this question from the chat. So Vigily asks, although he has one question, is it possible to follow the lead of some US states and try to push through a ban on mask and vaccine mandates? So they're talking about can we ban mask and vaccine mandates in Australia?
Mm-hmm. So with your state legislature. So basically, I think now, last count I had, I don't know, don't quote me. There's over 15 states that have said governors and state legislatures have passed laws that say we will abolish mandates. Federal mandates do not apply here. So if a business wants to have a mask mandate, a business can have a mask mandate. If a school system wants to have a mask mandate, they have to vote on that, and they have a right to implement that. But as far as saying, oh, well, because the president said now the state of Louisiana and the state of Florida are going to follow, that's when the state said no. And that's where nullification comes in. And that's where we have the right to say, to invoke our right in the Constitution to say no.
See, I think the big thing is, like, we don't have nullification rights. We can't recall premiers or prime ministers because, of course, we don't elect the premier or prime minister. We can't recall them. We can't have nullification to try and strike down a law. It's a lot more restricted than what we can do. I think in the Australian context, which is what he's asking about, it is possible. I don't think it's being likely anytime soon because you've got Western Australia, Northern Territory, Queensland, Victoria, Labor. They're definitely not going to do a ban on masks and vaccine mandates. South Australia I think they're Liberal, but they've been quite tough on their border laws. And if you they're the people who are doing the Face ID app, where you take a photo of your face and where you are if you're in quarantine. Let the police know within 15 minutes of getting a text from the police, and then if you don't send a message to them within 15 minutes of getting a text, they will then come and arrest you and check where you are. Again, New South Wales, obviously with what they're going through right now, they're not going to do a ban, and so that just leaves the ACT again won't. Also, Labor, it's where the capital is. It's mostly public servants. Who live in Canberra. It's an artificial city set up just to be the capital city of Australia. So it's full of public servants. So they always tend to vote Labor or Greens. That leaves Tasmania, really. That's the only Tasmania. Was there election recently, Gerry? Was that Tasmania that had their election recently?
No, didn't they replace the Premier resigned though, didn't he? And I thought the Premier changed because he stepped down. Actually, I'm trying to think.
No, he won. I just googled it. Yeah, they won. He won his. That's Peter.
That's the one before.
One
of them stepped down. Gawain, was it? One of them stepped down, I thought, but
no, because Goodwayne's he's still Premier right now.
Okay, I might be thinking of
maybe you're thinking of the Labor leader or something like that. But yeah, he's still in. I think Tasmania's got a slight majority.
Yes.
Yeah, they've got a very slim majority. It's I think it's by one seat is their majority in the lower house. So they're on a very narrow margin. So again, that's probably your best bet of getting a mask and vaccine mandate being banned. But if one of his party members goes rogue.
Right.
It doesn't fit with the party, then you're done for basically.
But see, that comes back to the whole bipartisan thing, or the partisanship or lack of that they're colluding together, because we're back to the one seat, like in the federal parliament, and they're all on the same page. It doesn't matter what they do; they're all for this. There's something, yeah. We're just can't win either way. What about the Northern Territory? What's happening up there? What's their situation?
So they're because they're
Don't hear much about it.
Northern Territory, for those who don't know, which is probably a fair few Australians and most foreigners, was set up just because it's such a big part of their population is Aboriginal. So it's been set up. That's one of the reasons that it was set up. It used to be part of South Australia. So South Australia used to be stripped in the middle of the country, like Western Australia is, but more to the east. So it wasn't exactly south. It was central, even though it has still the name South Australia. But that was all one state, and then they gave the northern part to the government, to the Commonwealth, which they can do. You can give land to the government, and then the Commonwealth then created a territory, the Northern Territory, and that's been set up to protect the Aboriginals. So they've got very, very strict border laws. Territories in Australia have more power than, say, DC does. Their premiers are called chief ministers. Each territory. We've got two of those. Have two senators in the federal parliament, plus members of the House of Reps. But the Northern Territory, because they've got such that big Aboriginal population, they're very much Labor voters in the same sense that African Americans tend to vote Labor. Democrats, the Aboriginals tend to vote Labor. It's the same logic. So basically, like for Americans, if you can imagine a state run by African Americans as voting for Democrats, and Democrats then passing laws to protect the Aboriginals, because of course they're more vulnerable because they don't have the same immune system as Westerners. But then of course they are pushing quite strongly for vaccine mandates because they've got such a vulnerable population. But because because of their immune system. But there's not the same suspicion of the government that there is in America. So there are some Aboriginals who are suspect of the government for the same reasons as they are in America with regard to the medical stuff, the violations of their rights by the government when it comes to medicine and science, but that's not to the same extent here. So it is still, they're very much supportive of these of the mandates there. So really, your only bet for getting a ban is Tasmania, and again, they're on a knife edge in Parliament. So there's not much chance of getting any sort of ban passed, at least until the federal election. If that changes, I don't think Scott Morrison is going to be prime minister at the federal election after the election next year. Even if his party wins, the right thinks libertarians and conservatives tend to think that he's done too much, and the left thinks he's done not enough. So it's the same with Berejiklian in New South Wales. The right thinks she's done too much, the left thinks it's not enough. So yeah, really, I doubt that we're going to have Scott Morrison in as prime minister. I think he will be replaced by someone from the liberal left, more moderate, more centrist. I think that's what we're going to see next election. So not even the federal government probably will do a ban, because they're going to try and appoint someone they're going to try to have a leader who's more moderate, more centrist, whereas Scott Morrison is more liberal right now.
Oh.
I think it's going to be a whole lot different outcome myself. It's those numbers joining UAP very fast in that magnitude says a lot to me about how people really are, because they do stay quiet. Like you said before, CD, people don't like being first, and most don't speak up. So they like everyone else to do it. It says so much. I think it's going to be a fascinating election. We should do a live on it. Well, that's what we should do, our own live coverage on the election.
I was thinking day after, just because, it'll be that'll give the English and the Americans more. I mean, I'm happy to do that if you want, but I'm thinking because the English and American audience, they're going to be asleep when the election happens. So I'm happy to do the night of the election and then a day after, once they announce all the votes. But
I was literally a thought bubble then. Whenever we should.
Yeah,
such a fascinating election.
That would be so cool.
I think that's too far down the line though. Probably it's that 6 months time. Cross that bridge when we get to it. Probably is my mindset.
Yes.
just have big voices of dissent. You know, maybe
yes.
if we could just have big voices of dissent and absolute, you know, non-compliance. And if someone is willing to just start that, you know, and it's going to take time. I mean, like I always go back to the story of Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was not the first person in that movement to try and get a boycott of buses. There was lots of attempts made in several states, but those people, it just didn't catch traction. It just didn't catch. But Rosa
was there a teenage mother who did it at one point? Am I correct? A teen mother who they decided to not support because they were waiting for Rosa to do it.
Right. No, that's very true. Like
because being a teen mother, you know, you're not going to be well respected if you try and use her.
Well, if you like, I've told Liberty before. If you look at the black and white pictures of Rosa Parks, she looks like a Proverbs 31, you know, very Christian, light-skinned lady. Not, you know, like you know, Marcus Garvey. And you got
to remember that this is mostly the GOP backing the civil rights movement and not Democrats.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
also
right.
very true. I mean, it was coming to an end. It was coming to an end. They could not keep. I mean, states rights. They were integrating, regardless of federal. You know, and then the people that didn't want to comply. I mean, it was just a matter of time. It was just a matter of time. But if you look at, I'm just saying, the movement.
Yes.
It doesn't just happen. And if something doesn't work the first time, you don't give up. You know, it didn't catch the first time. Okay, well, what can we do different? How can we market different? How can we, what more should we say? Should we be more deliberate? Should we be more defiant in our language? Should we, you know, have videos of someone just walking in somewhere, you know, and they're like, no, you can't come in here. And they're like, well, I'm going to go in there. And they're going to get kicked out. Like, they're not going to be allowed to stay there. But if someone sees someone else do it, they're not the first one, you know, but it takes a couple of first ones.
Yeah.
The inertia. And from inertia.
And that's what we're seeing. Yeah, that's right. Exactly the case. Yeah. And now I am looking forward to this election. It's going to be fascinating. So as soon as the billboards appear in my electorate, which is the most marginal in Queensland, third most in the country, and there's not much in it, the other two, I'll tell you.
Well, let me know, man. And when you figure out a candidate, I guess when they tell you who's running, let us know, man. We will. We'll be on everything that person's on. We'll support that person. You let us know, and we'll, you know, Liberty Twitter will get on it.
It'll be fascinating.
Cool, because you will have international attention on it. I mean, if we can create the international attention, because again, I think that the leaders of Australia are like everyone else and don't want to not be status quo, right?
No,
they like this because they're celebrated in the world right now. The Australian government is constant because there's no COVID. So, if you can, if you know, but if enough people realize the reason you don't have any COVID is because of inhumane action, they'll say, well, that's not right. You might not have a COVID, but you can't keep people from interstate travel. And if they can get that kind of international pressure, and I'm not saying an invasion, or I'm not suggesting any type of involvement, but just pressure. And
well, look at the crowds you had at was it a week ago? I reposted that too. Everybody else did. Was it baseball or football? Mm-hmm. The crowds in, I don't forget the state it was in. Massive. I mean, what, is COVID discriminatory now? You know, it's here in Australia, but it doesn't like the crowds over in the US with that game. That was amazing.
Yes, and people here, you have an entire population that says, no, I'll wear the mask to enter the store. I'll wear the mask to enter this football stadium. But as soon as I get through the door, it's off. And no, I'm not going to show you papers. No. How about no? and then that's fine. If it's that big of a deal to you, I'll take my money and I'll go somewhere else.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
In America, that is the most powerful thing that you can do. I'm sure it's the same thing in Australia. That's the best that change is with their money, or to take their money away.
Anyway, it's now 2.5 hours. I think we might finish up here.
Guys, I'm sorry. We can do this.
Anything you want to plug before we finish up, CD?
Oh, I'm on Twitter, Lady ANCAP, and no, I'm here for Australian liberty, man. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay.
I will have everyone's Twitters linked in the description for the podcast. If I can find, I'll try and also find a link to the Constitution and the Human Rights Act 2019. Just easy reference. It is pretty easy to find, but just I'll put a link in there for people to access if they're on their phones or whatever. We've got a good few shows coming up this week. We've got a second episode of Australian Economics coming up, which is two Austrian economic students doing a show in economics within Australian in an Australian context. We've got our episode 3 of the Gumtree of Liberty will be focusing on the Australian political parties and what their beliefs are, following on from episode 2. And then this coming up next weekend, we've got on Saturday night Eastern time at 6 p.m. Australian Eastern time at 8 a.m. I've got a show with a few Brits talking about the situation over there in England, and then we could have a show later that day at the normal live stream time of 8 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in Australia, where I'm talking with a few Americans about and a few Christians talking about a few Australians talking about Christianity and libertarianism and how those two fit together. Anyway, I think that's everything from us. So until next time,
great.
see you guys.
That was awesome.
That was great. Thank you.